Thank you, Ashwini. I think you're doing a very brave job. I've been seeing your organization from the time it was formed, and I think a great change has come about from some degree of pessimism about its role, some degree of doubts, to I think a level of great confidence. And as you say that renewable energy is an energy whose time has come. If its time has come, it has come essentially for two or three reasons. One is environmentally, it is the most sustainable power. The earlier renewable energy that we knew was the large hydro by and large. The other point is that for countries like India, there is huge energy security, because renewable energy fuel is something that is indigenous and it is not imported. So luckily today the oil prices are down and coal prices are down, so fuel costs are not an issue. Otherwise, the heaviest import bill of the country is of petroleum products. And I think renewable energy gives you that huge energy security, that you are in a very secure environment and there will be no inflationary costs beyond what you have installed. So the predictability of the cost of renewable power is there. The issues about renewable, you said yes, renewable purchase obligation, that is something, but unfortunately renewable power is not evenly distributed across the country. And FOR had done an exercise on this some years ago, and I think they again revised that study. The fact remains that some of the wind endowed states were earlier coming through meeting their obligations that could give an assured projection to the future. And the solar insolation areas were not giving an assured projection, but I think the main reason behind it was the cost of power, which today luckily I think solar power has broken that barrier when it has come to close to 5 rupees. It is certainly something that is affordable. But affordable, yes. Affordable at what point? Affordable, 5 rupees power is affordable at the consumption point. Let's face it. Very few consumers in India, in rural areas, etc., are prepared to pay more than 5 rupees for grid power. Secondly, industry, if it must use that power, I think needs to be considered in a different light by regulators from what we have been seeing in the past. So there are challenges. Industry cannot be a milking cow. It provides employment, it provides a manufacturing base, and ultimately the product has to be internationally competitive. The regulator's directive that must run power for renewables is very good, and I think a very laudable directive. But a little twist of the word and the language you see. Must run should not turn into must run. That you know, जब मस्ती में आया तो आ गया, जब नहीं आया तो कहीं गुल हो गया. So that, I think, you see, is a regulator's dilemma. That how do you say that yes, it is must run? Any power system can only operate on a firm schedule of supply and demand. Now, unless there is an assured schedule of supply at a point of time, you can never schedule the economics of distribution. Unless, of course, it is distributed generation in the sense that the consumer himself is his own master. He decides that he wants to have backup not back up, proceed by the power. That is as and when it comes. In fact, when I was in the electricity sector for a number of years, I used to say we don't have light, we have lightning. It comes and goes. So it cannot be operating on that kind of principle also. The regulator has a very unenviable task. He is not only a tariff setting body. The regulator has to ensure that the parameters of the grid are enforced and maintained. And they've become even stronger now with the sense of a national grid. The disruptors can erupt anywhere in the country. Earlier, when we have 5 regional grids, the chance of a national calamity were not so strong as today, which means that frequency deviations have to be attended to extremely religiously and strictly enforced. Now that can only come if you link renewable power, which is power of nature, to weather forecasting and as accurate weather forecasting as possible. Now there was a time when I believe that when I was a joint secretary, we used to say that the shortages, peak shortages are 15% or 20%. And I honestly believe that they could even have been 30%, realistically speaking, because reporting is not as truthful as it ought to be. Today we are in a reverse situation. In the morning session, somebody was talking of 4% peaking shortage. Yes, peaking shortage, surprising, because we have the PLF of the existing stations, other than those which are sitting idle, maybe 50,000 megawatts is sitting idle, not running, is only 50 to 55%, which is horrendous, because no conventional power station can be viable, in my view, anything below 75 or 70%. Otherwise, it will not be able to pay off its interest liability, if not the loans ultimately. So if the renewables have to come into a grid, into the system, you must have, the regulator has to ensure a huge degree of certainty of its supply. Anything beyond that certainty, I do not see as a grid operator can be a must run or must take situation. We do not have that kind of flexibility in frequency, because demand in a country like India, you see, can be very diverse, particularly in this season, rainy season, etc. Moment there is rains, the farmer doesn't need any electricity. Your air conditioning costs, load also crashes down. Suddenly there's a crash of load. Now what do? If you do must run for renewables at that point of time, it may all be very expensive power. He may have contracted power which is, 2 rupees a unit, 2 rupees 50 paise a unit. That's what the grid power is available at. Or if he has, of course, it comes in the same category, though luckily there are other riders to it, say a project like Bhakra, or Shravati project, or the Koina project. Now, I was pleasantly surprised to go through some statistics and see that the cost of this power from these large hydro projects set up at a good point of time ranges between 24 to 26 paise a unit. And how can you forego this power at a point of time? So these are hard economic realities. The regulator has his hands full with responsibilities on one side economics on the other, system constraints on the third side. Now we have another issue that, unfortunately we don't have the foreign participants with us today owing to some security glitch issues. But sooner than later, I think internationally we may be compelled to remove our conditions of indigenous capacity. And we may have to be forced to compete with these things. That, of course, is a domain on equipment dumping. But I was just trying to visualize where can the regulator come in. I think beyond the pale of international commerce is the electricity regulator. He can probably start examining and think in the future. That is for people like Ashwini to also guide them. If you can say must run for indigenously manufactured power, must run no or not, but a concessional tariff for domestic manufactured panels or industry. That's a legal point that you have to examine and guide the regulator. As I said, I'm taking this opportunity to mention this because we are an indigenous audience right now and participation. These are issues which are going to hit us maybe in a year or two very hard when the judgments on all these international disputes are finalized. The last issue, I think, for a regulator again is what assurance can he take on the reliability of power? Because let us face it, distribution companies are the most vulnerable points of the electricity system today. If we can take a citizen away from the distribution company, excellent. If we can bring prepaid metering, excellent. It improves his situation, reduces the risk of recovery, etc., etc. The ultimate objective is that power must be delivered at the least cost to people. That's the citizen. But if you can, the whole purpose of this renewable, and particularly say solar, is that you can have it on your own land, on your own rooftop, on your own. Wind, not as versatile as that. But yes, wind can be a bulk producer, but solar, we should honestly look at regulation which encourages totally decentralized individual use and give the highest encouragement to that, because you are saving. You see, the investment cost in the conventional power system was in the ratio of 2:1:1. If 2 in generation, 1 in transmission, 1 had to be in distribution. Now, if the entire cost is coming out of generation only for the entire cost, strictly speaking, you are saving 50% of the investment. And in the future, you are also addressing right-of-way issues. Because right-of-way is going to be one of the most difficult things for transmission in the future. Nobody is prepared to give his land. As a joint secretary, I used to be very angry with Power Grid. I was handling them for a while. They would install a tower and not give any compensation to the farmer for that. Now, I told them, I said, look here, I'm a farmer. And I know what nuisance a tower can do in your land. Why don't you give him compensation? No, it's not to be given. today you are forced to do it. Because how long can you escape justice? You can't be using the Telegraph Act of the British times, force your will on an independent country in a democracy. We must do what is fair. In Himachal, we used to have the worst problems evacuating power from hydro stations because one tower fellow would demand at times, I want 1 crore. That's the missing link. You can't connect. If you have to take a detour, it's extremely difficult. So what I'm merely trying to say is that wherever the regulator could possibly see that we are doing away with the transmission and distribution system, we should free that person as much from regulation as possible and make it attractive. That is why in the previous session when we were talking about funding, I said it is shocking that we cannot fund rooftop. When we can fund a refrigerator, we can fund a motorcycle or a motor car. That is why I was mentioning. You have to find ways of doing it. Now the regulator may or may not be able to enter that domain because already he has his hands full. He is today governing the sector in a way. He is executive cum judiciary as far as the sector is concerned. His resources at the moment are extremely limited. But his role is extremely onerous, and what the regulator decides to do to the sector, he is the person who can give it a perspective. If the sector is to grow in the next 5 years, 10 years, that lease of life has to come as much from a regulator as from government policy or financing. So I think where renewables are concerned, this is a tremendous thing. So there's one area in which I think that the role of regulator is limited, but it is for us to see that can a regulator, how can he be some kind of a stimulant to research and development? Because, you know, when we are talking of solar, we're talking of wind, we are only scratching part of the surface. We are not looking at a country like India, which has a huge coastline. We are not looking at wave energy. We are not looking at energy from flowing streams of water. Micro turbines, what they can do. Reversible turbines, how much energy can they produce? And that is again free energy. Now we have not touched that. Maybe we are waiting for some research to be done in some other country, and that research comes to us. Our mindset, unfortunately, has become that of a consumer of products and technology and not the innovators of technology. Similarly, geothermal. We've got to seriously see the role of geothermal in heating buildings and maybe also in providing large-scale geothermal power. Countries like Iceland, they're thriving on geothermal. Of course, they have geysers. But we've got to look at other methods of accessing the heat inside the core of the earth. Now, I'm not sure if the regulator is the right person only to do it, but I think the regulators have to be alive, what I'm primarily trying to say. Renewable energy is a national security issue. And when you look at national security, you must not only look at today's technology, but maybe also technologies which are going to come into the future and should come fast in our own country. I think I've already overstepped my brief. That's, you know, when you have an uninvited guest, he tends to exceed his brief. Thank you very much.